Hi, so this is the day that we've finally been waiting for. It's been 7 weeks and our boat is being launched into the water. Here is all the things that we've been doing in the last 7 weeks.
You and me, we're family. The bond that we share is as deep as the sea. No matter how rough things may come to be, you and me, we're family. Sing home, hey, long for the ride home. Hey, I'll stay by your side.
So we're making an early start this morning. We're going into the yard for the lift out.
Morning! Okay, so we're just going into the yard. They're just trying to get the backstays off, but they can't find the tool. When they've done that, they can drop them and then get in the dry dock.
Just take the backstays off. We're just going to keep them clear of the crane.
Okay, so we are finally out in the yard and this is what it's like in a yard. We're going to go and have a look at some boats, see if we can find out some information. Rowan's going to tell us a few facts about different parts of boats and yeah, we're going to look at what life is like in the yard. What's it like in the yard then?
Awesome. No, I really like it. Enjoying it. Got lots of jobs to do.
If you go into the yard, you can still hear the splashing water on the bottom of the sugar scoop.
It just feels weird because it's not rocking, so I keep on doing this to make me feel used to it. And, oh, just a reminder, tomorrow's my birthday.
This is an aluminium boat and you can tell because there's no paint on here. Also there's no rust, so it's not steel, and it's also got chines. So instead of being smooth, it's got like these. This is a steel boat and you can tell because of the rust. This bit has rusted right through. But people have steel boats because they're one of the strongest materials and also they're cheaper than aluminium. So they've got a hole through here and that's a bow thruster. Most bow thrusters look like this. Is this so you can turn easier. So this is a long keel and it has many advantages and disadvantages. Like it's harder to turn because it's easier to pivot on a stick than it is on something long. But then it also, you can cut through the water easier. It also works as a skeg. We'll go right there. A skeg is what protects the rudder. This is a half skeg because it protects only this half of the rudder. And then this half of the rudder isn't protected. So this, as well as a lifting rudder, has a lifting keel. This is another boat with a lifting keel. This is a bilge keel, and it technically means there are 2 keels. It's useful because it's a shallower draft, and also, as you can see in the Boatyard, it doesn't have to be supported because you can just stand it on its keels.
So one of the first things that we had to do was get the propeller off, and that was not easy.
So the propeller should be quite a straightforward job. We wanted to basically take it off, take out the wearing bushings out, there's 3 of them in there, and then put it all back together and change the oil. But the first job was to take the propeller off, and it was absolutely impossible. I went through two pulleys, broke one, the other one wouldn't work, and I was a bit reluctant, so we basically had to get Chris from the yard to bring his industrial strength pulley, and even that wouldn't bring it off. So then we got the blowtorch out, and after about 10 minutes of heating the propeller, there was an almighty pop and the thing flew off. So that was the propeller off. So once the propeller was off, we had to drain the oil out of there, so there's about 9 litres of fluid in there. We drained that off and then had to take the oil seals out, which was quite a tricky job, and luckily we got a friend who was an engineer who had some little pulley grabbers which did the job really quick.
So today's job is to clean the prop. It's not too bad because it has been jet washed. Tried a little bit of the scrapers to get the raised bits off, and then pretty much actually just this aquafertan, it's acid, hydrochloric acid, and I just found that was the easiest thing. You just pour it on, and I've just been rubbing it gently, and it gets rid of everything really. And if you need to, you can scrape it a little bit as well. But yeah, propeller's looking much cleaner. Ta-da! Nice. But this time we put on some metal primer, and then I put a bit of antifoul on it, and we'll just see how it works really, whether it actually is more effective or not. So after the propeller was finally off, we checked the hull.
So when we had the boat lifted and sprayed down, there was a lot of pitting appeared in the epoxy. At first we thought it was osmosis, but there's no bubbling on the gel coat itself. It's just between the gel shield layer and the gel coat, so something obviously got in there when the layer was actually being applied. Looking back at old footage from Tunisia, we realised that there was a change of shade and there was a change of paint at that point. And so we think either that the paint had become contaminated, or some dust or some moisture had got on the hull before that layer of epoxy got on. So now I'm going to have to go over with epoxy filler over all those tiny little gaps in the gel shield and fill it, and then we're going to put another layer of gel shield over the top. But it's going to be a long job.
So Woody's job today is the continuous job of filling up with epoxy filler all the defects in the gel shield. So he's filling that all up where the little spots are, and then we can sand it and clean it, and then put a nice coat of new gel shield on.
So this is a 2-part epoxy filler, and it's to basically fill all of the little scratches and dents in the gel shield which we had put on about 1.5 years ago.
So we spent quite a lot of time preparing the surface, cleaning it and filling it with epoxy filler, and then it was finally would be ready to paint. As you all know, there's a lot been happening for everybody in the last 7 weeks. We came out of the water, everything was fine, and about a week later then it was announced that there was a pandemic and everything went into lockdown, and we were locked up in this yard. This is a quick update. The yard have told us that we've got to launch our boat into the water, ready or not, on Monday, because they're shutting down the yard. So they're officially making us homeless. So we're trying to get our boat ready quicker than we really wanted to.
And return to your homes and stay there. We are facing a very serious health emergency that requires the cooperation of all of us. Thank you. Achtung, Achtung.
So polishing the hull is a good thing to do before you do the antifoul, because otherwise some of the products used can drip down into the antifoul. So I started off with it's a liquid that kind of cleans any stains, so I washed it all down with that, and then I used a a cutting compound to polish it to get rid of all the tarnish, then a compound that was slightly less strong, and then I finally did a wax with the hull. And then there was a few repairs that we did as well, and improvements on a few little scratches, and then I sort of went over those again. So there was one thing on our list that was really on the wish list, but then when we checked it more closely, we realised this job was moved higher up the list really. It was to do with the waterline. So just where the waterline was, we noticed the very beginnings of osmosis, which is just tiny, tiny little bubbles and raised areas of the gel coat, and we were concerned that that's because moisture was getting in, because at the rear of the boat tends to sink in the water a lot more. So what we did, we started at the front of the boat and we raised it slightly, so that at the back of the boat, where the boat tends to be in the water, we had a much larger area that had been raised. So now, once the waterline's been painted, the hull's been polished, we were ready to put the epoxy on the underside.
Put some epoxy on the spots that we think were weakened or were compromised when it was put on in Tunisia. So we've reinforced that with a layer of epoxy, and the second layer has got to go on between 3 hours and 3 days, but that's as long as there's no moisture in the air. I think 65% moisture is about as much as you want really, and it can go up to 80%. So now we're just keeping an eye on the weather. And unfortunately, when we woke up this morning, the weather wasn't looking too good, but it's changeable all the time. It changes by the hour. So it's trying to find that sweet spot.
So I've just checked. I've checked AccuWeather and I've checked the Met Office, and neither of them forecast any rain. In fact, a 0% chance and only a few percent of precipitation. So it's not supposed to rain, but on windy it says it could rain. But yesterday no one said it was going to rain. It rained, so who knows? It kind of feels like it's going to rain, but then again it could just blow over.
That's getting really impossible. Every day we've been thwarted by the rain. So I think we're going to hold off for an hour just to see if these dark clouds pass, and then we can crack on.
Okay, so the good news is that we finally got around to doing the epoxy, and the bad news is that the weather forecast wasn't correct, and now it's started to rain slightly, which makes us a little bit nervous because it's not good doing this in any kind of humidity, and we don't want any rain, and it's supposed to get worse later. So we're just going to keep our fingers crossed that the weather forecast is not correct again, and that it doesn't really rain. So we put on 2 coats of epoxy in most places, not all of the spaces, and then we put on the Antifoul, and we put 2 coats of Antifoul, and if we had any left we put another sort of layer in different places.
We actually, this has gone back some time, as the surveyor's report a few years ago pointed out a little bit of cracking in the gel coat around the chain plate. We checked the bolts on the chain plate and they were absolutely fine. But now we're in the yard and we've noticed some cracking along the rub rail as well. We thought we'd investigate a bit further. And there's a slight bit of delamination on the inside, not around the bolts luckily, but just on the tow rail itself. So we're going to take off this lower and take off the chain plate and grind out the gel coat damage and just basically have a look underneath. It might be that we have to sort of build the fiberglass up again under the tow rail. Luckily it's not structural, but it's just while the boat's out of the water, we might as well see to it, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. So the rubbing strake is a piece of fiberglass. It's a sacrificial bit of fiberglass that stands proud of the hull.
So I took on the job of doing the rubbing strip. I'd never really done gel coat before, but I thought, well, you know, I've got to do some jobs to help out really. So I worked out, you know, how to mix it, and day by day I would fill those cracks in layer by layer, because I just realised it takes forever. You can't do it all in one go. I'm trying to sort out this rubbing strip.
We had to Dremel out those little cracks, and there was quite a few of them. And then refill with gel coat filler.
Woody's dremeled it all out, and now we're just filling it with gel coat, and then we're going to paint it. So it kind of, the paint and this gel coat should sort out all the cracks and make it look much better than it was. It's not going to compromise the hull anyway, because the water doesn't go into the hull. This bit's pretty much separate to the hull, so it's just cosmetic really. After layers and layers of gel coat on the tow rail and the rubbing strip was finally ready to paint, and then we could put the strip back on, the reflective strip.
There's a lot of work for what's basically a cosmetic job, but the results, I think, speak for themselves.
So one of the other jobs along with the propeller was to service the bow thruster.
The bow thrusters on the Amel Super Marimus are quite unique. They were one of the first production boats to have retractable bow thrusters. And it's quite a basic bit of kit, but with anything that's kind of pioneering, things do go wrong and you need to get the right service kit. I didn't do as much service in it as I thought, because it was kind of quite sound inside. There was a little bit of mayonnaising of the oil, so basically just changed the oil, resealed everything, and then put it back. We had a few problems with the old B&J equipment. I mean, it was 20 years old. We weren't sure whether it was the actual transducers or the dials that weren't working, or the computer. And there's a lot of wires with the old B&J setup. So we thought, as soon as we got the time, we'll bite the bullet and upgrade a little bit to the NMEA 2000 system, as opposed to the NMEA 0183 system. So it meant pulling a lot of wires out, and it also meant re-drilling the hole for the transducer here. And as anybody knows, trying to drill a slightly larger hole in a hole that's already there is quite tricky. So first of all, I just cleared what was there before, took everything out, and then rebuilt the housing for the transducer here. Built it up with fiberglass, then epoxy filled it and give it a layer of epoxy paint. And as you can see now, we've antifouled the whole thing. And this transducer here does the depth, temperature and speed. So just 3 jobs in one, which is great. So I could take a lot of wires out and replace it with one wire on the NMEA 2000 backbone, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time. But I didn't think we'd get the chance to do it. But as we knew we were going to be in here for an extra few weeks, we kind of grabbed some budget from the future and did the job now.
So because I'm getting bored in quarantine, I got bored and I wanted to make this garage, this small die-cast, toy metal die-cast car garage.
So another job here that I was really eager to do, because we were getting water inside our lazarette. So I wanted to get this bumper bar off. So we took it off and realised actually it was quite loose. And then underneath it, some of the paint was peeling away, so we kind of sanded that all down. This is where the paint's all just kind of, it was flaking off, so now I've just chiselled it out. It's got a good surface for the new gel coat to adhere to. And I've pulled out any bits of Sikaflex that were in there, in those screw holes. So I put the gel coat on after sanding it down, and then I sanded it down a bit, and I'm just trying to dry it just to make sure it's fully dry, because we want to put the epoxy on today. It's not the prettiest job, but it's not going to be seen anyway. It was more about just protecting it and making sure no moisture was getting in. We covered it with epoxy and put this bumper back on with a lot more filler in the screw hole bits, and hopefully that should stop the leak. It's so much tighter than it was at the beginning, which is why I think the water was coming in. It was just so loose. On the bow of our boat, we have what we call the dolphin seat, so the kids can go up here and watch the dolphins when we see them. That's something that Woody made in Egina a couple of years ago, but that needs maintenance, that piece of wood. So we took that off and we polished all the stainless here, and we re-varnish the seats. In fact, we got our friend helped us out on that one because it's all getting a bit, time's getting on. So Werner, our fantastic friend, has varnished this seat for us, given us some really good coats of paint, and that'll be ready to go on. Everything on the boat is looking pretty clean and shiny. I noticed how dirty our fenders are. Now I haven't got any footage of doing this because I've just basically put my head down and got on with it. But you can see the finished product. These fenders, I spent a whole day scrubbing them, and yeah, my back did feel it at the end. But I didn't want anything to put any marks on the hull. Now it's all nice and shiny. So also winches. I have been talking about doing these winches for years now. I managed to do one when it stopped working in Turkey, but this time I managed to do all 11 winches with a little bit of help from the kids at the end, and now all of them are super shiny and they work really well. So really glad to get that ticked off. So we don't lose bits.
Is it heavy?
Right, put that down there carefully.
Oh god, that's so heavy. Wait.
I can do it.
Right.
Mama, please. Mama, please.
Yeah, right, don't look at them. Don't look. Just carry on with your jobs.
That one behind it is supposed to. Things fell out. Mom.
Can't do it. Have you cleaned those two bits? And that?
Oh, there's another bit.
Ewan. Yeah, that one as well. To have a go at putting these in.
Mom, I think Gary wants to go for a ride.
Seriously, are you doing that, or are you doing the winches, guys, please? What was it like doing the winches?
Nay. It's satisfying.
Satisfying.
Yeah, my favourite was when we put it apart, when we put it back together, and it made such a satisfying sound.
Well, it was hard, it was greasy, the cleaning bit was fun.
The final job is to put the new anodes on, so they all went on as well. Okay, so I've just been up to the marina office to find out about going back in the water. Even though we'd paid 6 months till the 25th of April, we're only actually paid till the 11th of April because you don't get a good discount when you're in here. You only get 5% discount in the yard. It's very confusing, so I've come back and said to Willie, like, we need to get in the water pretty much ASAP. So the final job was to get the boat lifted at the end and do underneath the keel, because the keel is quite difficult to get down there when it's in the normal chocks. Okay, so it's the morning and we're quickly trying to paint one more coat on the bottom of the keel, or Woody is, because they're about to launch us.
This is the final bit of epoxy for the bottom of the keel. Final job, and then we've got to get this on today, and then tomorrow before we go in I'll put a final coat of Antifouling.
Actually feel quite kind of emotional because, you know, we've spent all this time working on this boat and my hands are just raw. I've got no, the skin's all come off just from working for 7 weeks non-stop, and here's our beautiful boat going back in. I highly recommend working on your own boat because you appreciate it a lot more. So yeah, in some ways we have been very busy, and yeah, this lockdown thing has been going on the whole time for everybody. And for us, I suppose it wasn't really such a bad thing because it meant we couldn't go anywhere, and even if we wanted a day off to go out for a walk with the kids on the beach or whatever, we couldn't do it anyway. So we kind of forced to stay here, which meant we just kept carrying on and working on the boat, and the kids just managed by, you know, going around the yard and finding places where they could go off and play in the corner where no one could see them. So we've all pretty much managed quite well. We've coped, we've stayed in contact with people.
Good morning. Okay, the yard. Woody.
Ewan on haddock.
Good morning, Ewan. How are you?
I am good, thank you.
Alright, okay.
People have stayed in contact with us, thank goodness for social media and the internet. Yeah, people have been in touch on Instagram, Facebook. We've been still putting out some YouTube videos. We've got all our patrons always keep in touch. We've been doing the Skype calls with Sailing Melody and Jack on Sailing Melody. They've just starting out now. They're sort of like we were 3 years ago, really, working on their boat. Yeah, worth checking out their channel. It's a new channel, and we just, yeah, we really have felt like that everyone's been right there with us. Okay, it's Saturday night and it's Saturday night quiz. How's the quiz going, Woody?
It's really annoying. It's all these songs that I can remember, but I can't remember the name of the artists.
And the boat is, yeah, new and shiny, and we'll probably take a few days off when we get back in the water, and then we'll be back to some more jobs.
There's one thing I think this whole experience has taught us is you cannot take freedom for granted, and it can be snatched away from you at a moment's notice. So as soon as we on the water again and the marina lets us out of this place, we are going to travel the world and see so much of it, and hopefully film as much of it.
And we cannot really thank our patrons enough for sticking with us in this journey, in this dream of ours, and staying with us, and actually the new patrons that have joined us as well. So yeah, just to let you know, as soon as we are in the water and as soon as they let us out this marina, we are off and the journey continues.
Comfort food.
Comfort food.
That's me set up for night.
My knees.
So thanks for watching, and thanks in particular to our patrons who make these videos possible. Without your support, they wouldn't happen.
No matter how rough things may come to be, you and me, we're family. Sing home.
We would really love to hear from you, so you could go over to the Patreon page or even the Facebook page and leave comments there.
Stay by your side, oh, hey, you'll always be.
And if you want to do it, do it.
Right